There we go. I'll unmute Dr. Stedman. Dr. Stedman, can you hear me?
I can. Yes, sir.
Excellent. All right. Folks are coming in tonight. Dr. Shepard's with us.
Dr. Crawford said he may be just a few minutes late signing in. He was at a meeting with the superintendent. So,
okay. I hope that's a good thing.
yeah, it was I think it was just a general meeting that they had to be at.
All right. There's Dr. Crawford. And there's Dr. Shepard.
I'm working off the iPad Pro tonight. This is a new one on me.
Uh-oh. I've got a Samsung pad that I work off of, and it's just different. It
is. I left my MacBook at the office when I left out of there, and I said, oh, this is going to be an experiment when I try to log on to this.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna have to go back and get in settings here because I'm having to admit everybody that comes in. I told them not to do that, but that's all right. We'll make it work. What time is it? 6:58. All right. Oh yeah, I meant to pull up another document here. Let me see what I've got here. That wasn't what I wanted. Okay. The citizen came. Look, I've got my shirt on, and I buttoned it up here.
Looking good.
I'm like Paul Gordos, Dr. Hamilton. I'm like Paul Gordos. I asked him how come he buttoned his shirt. He's kind of a narrow shoulder fellow. I said if he didn't, his shirt fell off. So I don't have that problem, but I was out in the sun a few minutes ago, and I made sure I had it up so I didn't get burned. It's only slightly less hot than the surface of the sun here today.
Correct.
Great.
What did y'all have today?
It was 100 here.
Same here.
It was 100 in Bowling Springs yesterday. I'm sitting here. My yard man came today. I have no idea why. He ran the lawnmower over the yard. I'm just watching my yard die.
All
It
right.
was so lush and green and pretty. And of course, I've got irrigation, and it looks so pretty. But when you have 100-degree days with this kind of humidity, it is just burning up.
Nothing you can do.
That's true.
There's a cool 87 in the mountains today.
Oh Lord, you were up on top of the hill. I know you got it made. You got it made.
God's country.
Yep, I know. I've got to get back that way. All right. All right. Okay. All right, I've got 7:02. I'm getting ready to get started. Let's see how many folks. We still got people that waiting to get in. Let's see. Chat. Oh, I like the Godfather. Keep him away from me. All right. Okay. If somebody else comes in, it should notify me. Good evening. This is Mel 603. I see we have the full house tonight. We have Dr. Crawford, Dr. Stedman, Dr. Shepard, Dr. Hamilton. So we'll get started. As always, we start with our weekly schedule where we are. This is week 2. This was Human Resources Week. So to that end, you would work on discussion board activity 2 about human resources. And also your OMA task 2 is due, which also goes along with human resources. It goes along with building an instructional program, working on your professional development plan as you did in the APTEL. As a reminder, task 1, 2, and 3 of the APTEL are task 2 of the OMA. Simply take the labels off and make sure you address your special populations, as I told you last week. That's the only thing that you have to add to that is address your special populations. Some folks did that in their APTEL, and if you did, you're good to go. But if you didn't address specifically special pops, I ask you to do that. So that's where we are as week 2. And so if we look at our discussion board, interview an administrator concerning HR resource practices, include position openings, job announcement, obtaining candidates, interviewing process, hiring process. Also inquire about services such as employee assistance, compensation plans and benefits. Finally, determine how position openings, job announcements, obtaining candidates is conducted in your district. And so I had several of those that came in, and they're all doing well. I do want to highlight one document from last week's activity on setting the priorities for your budget, the 5 most important things. I did have one that I read that I really liked, and it talked about number 1, the 5 most important steps is identify fiscal policy and instructional goals. And that's how we kind of started this course. What we're trying to teach you is to be able to link your master schedule and your school budget to your school improvement plan, which outlines your instructional goals. And that's the whole idea. And so that should be number 1 in your budgeting process, is to make sure that you're aligned with your instructional goals, which come from your school improvement plan. So I want to give a shout out to Veronica Crawford, who did this excellent job. And Veronica is exactly right. We always start out our master schedule. Our number one goal in our master schedule is to support the school improvement plan, our instructional initiatives. Number 1 goal of our budget is to support our instructional initiatives, from the school improvement plan. So that's kind of the genesis. Remember, it's a triangle. Your budget and your schedule have to support your instructional goals from your school improvement plan. So thank you, Veronica, for that. All right, back to the task at hand. I've got some documents tonight that I'm going to cover briefly before I'm going to spend the bulk of the time, hopefully, in EVOS later tonight. And EVOS does speak to human resources. It's about putting your people where they do the best to get the best results with students. And one of the things you have to be able to do is convince your people that they have an equal chance to show growth with every group of kids. And so that's why I want to show you the EVOS model tonight. But before we get there, this is kind of impromptu. These folks that work with me, they understand that you kind of have to be on your toes. What I want each of Dr. Stedman, Dr. Shepard, Dr. Hamilton, Dr. Crawford in turn to take a minute and talk about how they went about obtaining teacher candidates in the districts. They work in varied districts across the state, and I'll kind of wrap it up with what happened in Charlotte. And I'll also speak to two of the other three districts that I worked in, which were smaller districts. But so I'll start with Dr. Stedman. Dr. Stedman worked in Robeson County.
Yes, sir.
Which is a mid-sized county?
We had a population of about 24,000 students because of the past two hurricanes. They're going to start this next school year with 1,000 students less because people have moved because their homes were destroyed.
Yes.
So,
but yeah, 20 to 40,000 is a mid-sized district in North Carolina. And so what was the process for obtaining candidates there?
Well, we had at the central office level, when I was a building principal, we had someone that was responsible for trying to recruit, going out and recruiting teachers. There was a time that they actually would go travel out of state and to job fairs. And as a principal, we had to sign up to go to at least 2 job fairs out of state travel with these people. And so we will I looked for quality teachers when I was traveling, but then the process was that this person would bring back or recruit the best that they could go out there and find. And from that's where we got our pool from. And we were required to work from the pool that they brought back at the central office level. We would go back and review the resumes, and we would, from that, we would say we would like to interview the following people, and our interviews were set up from that point.
Mm-hmm. It was much the same way when I was in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. We had job fairs. When I was in Burke, we had job fairs. When I was in Rutherford, we had job fairs. When I was in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we traveled. I did the Northeast. I traveled from New York to Boston to Rhode Island, Connecticut. I was a recruiter for that area, even though I was a building principal. Once a year, I had to go for 2 weeks and recruit that area during that time. And I'm going to tell you the reason why I'm kind of highlighting this tonight. Dr. Shepard is in Henderson County, which is in western North Carolina. Other than the town of Hendersonville, it's fairly rural. What efforts does your county have to try to recruit or to get candidates?
Yeah, I mean it's similar. Our district office does a pretty good job of going out to job fairs. We're very close to a couple of very good teaching universities. UNC Asheville, Western Carolina University are right in our backyard. You know, we're 12 miles from my high school's 12 miles from 15 miles from downtown Asheville. So we're very close to Buncombe County and Asheville schools there. So one thing we do have going for us, other than our district office gathering candidates, they put that candidate list out to our schools. But primarily as a principal, it is left up to us to recruit and retain our teachers. And so I attend job fairs as a principal. I make sure I have a really good relationship with our universities. And that's a partnership. And so we make sure we request and place a lot of the best student teachers coming out of universities. And so there's a great partnership that takes place from the principal level as well, which is a very unique thing. So we have the job fairs, but we also have the relationship with universities. And then we also have to do a lot of recruiting on our own to get candidates. The great thing is right now, everybody and their mother wants to live in Asheville and Hendersonville. Yeah. So we have a lot of teaching candidates, which is really good because people want to move into the area. So, I have 5 positions open this year, and I probably have at minimum from one of my positions 25 candidates, and some of those can be even more depending on what that position is. And so the area does a lot for us. People want to live in the mountains, and so it kind of recruits itself. And I'm thankful for that.
I suspect it's the same way. Thank you, Dr. Shepard. I suspect it's the same way at the beach with Dr. Hamilton.
Yes, teach at the beach, and it sort of recruits itself in many cases. Plus, we have UNCW here, so that helps us a lot. Gives us a pool. Lots of times, people come here to school and don't ever want to leave. Back when I worked in HR in the early 2000s, we did a lot of recruiting nationally. That has really been scaled back as central office budgeting has been scaled back over the last few years. So we don't have that so much anymore, but we were never held to someone having to hire the people that we found. There are a few job fairs that people in HR attend, and if they see someone that they think is a strong candidate, then of course they send out an email and let us know. People apply on Teacher Match, and teachers send us resumes. And so that's probably the first go-to we have is who sent us a resume, and even better, who took the time to print a nice resume and bring it to the school and drop it off for you. Yes. We also are fortunate enough here that we do offer we're the 12th largest district in the state with about 27,000 children. We offer the largest teacher supplement of anybody in this area. So that's a huge recruiting tool for us. And at our very high needs schools, they also get additional supplements just for being there and for staying. And then if they have good performance, they also get some extra money on top of that, all out of local funds. They've also done things at high needs schools like paying for all the teachers to apply and go through the National Board Certification process, but then the teachers had to agree to stay in that building for 5 years after that. And most recently, our HR department, our board, started a new policy where once you're hired and you go somewhere, you have to stay there 3 years before you are able to put your name on the transfer list to ask for a transfer to go somewhere else, to just try to help maintain some stability, especially in some high need schools where turnover is so high.
Dr. Crawford is in Guilford. That's probably the 3rd largest district in the state. Dr. Crawford, how do you obtain candidates in Guilford County?
Yeah, it's very similar. It's very centrally located. The district will gather a pool of information, pool of candidates for us. They don't have the district out of state recruiting that they once had. Because I remember that being a factor. But also the last couple of years, and I was really surprised Guilford was so late getting into this game, because I remember working with when I was in Charlotte Mech, they've just now really hooked up with Teach for America. That's a fairly new process here with Guilford, but because I work with TFA, back when I was an assistant principal in CMS. So, and again, targeting TFA teachers for high needs school, and that's kind of a dual-sided, double-edged sword there. Especially when you're pressed for trying to fill high needs positions.
Right.
But that's a new foray that they're using in Guilford. I have a magnet school that's a language magnet, and so part of my language magnet mandate is that we have natural born or native born Spanish speakers, and so I work also a lot with companies like EPI, and they have a new name now, but what was VIF?
Yeah. All right. Teach for America, for those of you who don't know, is Domestic Peace Corps. They're young people who have a 4-year degree, mostly in business, and for whatever reason didn't get a job in that area, and they get a stipend from the government, and they get paid from the district. They cost about half of what a beginning teacher costs, because the government does the stipend for the rest. It's a federal program. I had my first one 24 years ago in 1995 in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. But Dr. Crawford kind of set me up there. The whole point of this long-winded soliloquy here is that obtaining teacher candidates is not as easy as it used to be. unless you're in a vacation area like Wilmington, the beach, or Asheville, the mountains, or you're right next door to a major teaching university, which there aren't that many of them anymore, just like Appalachian's now more business than it is teaching, you're going to have to be responsible a lot of time to help or to be involved with recruiting teachers. The money's not there in HR departments to send people to travel all over like one time was. It's going to be hard to get candidates. You're going to have to revision what you think teacher recruitment is, and you're going to have to start looking at things like trying to partner with universities to get your teacher assistants a 4-year degree. You're going to have to start looking at lateral entries. You're going to have to start looking at non-traditional type candidates. And that's going to put much more burden on you to supervise them, to induct them, to work staff development with them, because many of the people that you're going to get are not going to be the traditional teacher candidates that you one time got that had been through traditional student teaching and have wanted to be a teacher since they were a small child. Many people that come to the business now do it almost incidentally, like Teach for America. They couldn't find a job in their field, and so that's why they came to Teach for America. And so one of the things that I wanted you to find out is every district is different, but one of the things is how do you go about getting candidates? And also, once you may have to be involved in that, and it may be difficult, especially even if you're in a popular place, if you're at a high-need school, if you're at Mary C. Williams in Wilmington, I suspect that's a little harder to find folks at Mary C. Williams than it is at Parsley. And so most of you, when you get your first time out, you're not going to be at the best place in town. You're going to be at a high-risk school more than likely. And what will make or break you is hiring good teachers and then inducting them and staff development, growing them into the great teachers that they are. I only have one beginning teacher that was good day one. I only have one my whole career. The rest of them, it was a struggle for hopefully the first month or two, but some of them for the first year or two, it was a struggle. You're going to get a lot more of those candidates now because they're not your traditional candidates. So learning the AppSell, how to set up PLCs, learning the AppTel, where you develop a professional growth plan for your teachers. Understand that HR, there are limits in what you can do. You can't just go and hire whoever you want whenever you want. You have to follow the process. And many times the process is cumbersome or it knocks out candidates that you think might be good. So make sure you know what the process is in your district or the place where you get your job. Make sure you understand how do we go about getting candidates. They don't just show up at your door. Most places, and if you're in a rural place or some smaller districts, there may not be anybody. You call HR and say, how many candidates do you have for this job? And we don't have any. What are you going to do then? Your success or failure your success or failure is going to be based on the faculty that you have, working with them to improve them all the time, a continuous improvement model. That is, the AppSell is a continuous improvement model where you work PLCs and you're always doing staff development. The AppTel is a growth model as well, but it's also an induction model for new people. But it's not going to be as easy as you think to get quality people in your building. So you're going to have to learn all these ways to take the people that you get and turn them into the good people.
Dr. Lamb, the Sandhill Consortium, I don't know how far it stretches out, located in the Southern Pine Carthage area. This year, based on the size of the school districts, they are reaching out to teacher assistants and the school there. There was a process in each district that qualified for this consortium, where they applied. Now, each district was allowed to send 3 or 4 candidates to become teachers. And again, it goes back to what Dr. Hamilton said. We're the home of University of North Carolina at Pembroke in Robinson County, and that is a large teacher university. And so we collaborate locally with them, and then we've got Fayetteville State over in Cumberland County. Cumberland County gets most of them, but we can recruit from that area as well. So, you pull at every string that you can.
Yeah, it's not like when I first started in the business, there were people knocking on my door all the time as a principal looking for jobs. That doesn't happen anymore. There's other places that compete. There's other careers. The pay has been stagnant forever. And just as was just pointed out, districts poach your teachers away from you, offer 3% more or 4% more supplement, and you have to get the beginners. And what our data tells us is schools that have a lot of beginning teachers aren't nearly as effective as those who don't have a bunch of beginners. And if you've got turnover always, or you can't get quality people, it's going to affect the outcome. Doesn't matter how good a principal you are, if you don't have good teachers, you're not going to be successful. So understand that you aren't going to have Dr. Shepard and Dr. Hamilton are in unique situations where they have 25 applicants for a job because they're in highly desirable locations. More than likely, where you get your first job, it's not going to be that way. And you need to understand it. You may have to work, and you're going to have to get out there and be the kind of person that people want to work for. Okay.
And the universities are not producing as many teachers, even in elementary ed. So 20 years ago, when I was in a high needs school, sometimes I would have hundreds of applicants for one job. And you used the number 25 a few minutes ago. That's probably about right. It really has reduced. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even in an ideal situation.
And, even though you may land some of those top tier student teachers, interns coming out of a university, they might only be graduating, less than a quarter of what they used to in some cases. And so how top is that top tier when you're talking about a limited selection of candidates?
Looks like 600 graduates for 4,000 openings. Last time I checked.
Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then from those that do go into teaching, you don't maintain all of them. They get into it and they realize this is not what I want. So they don't, many of them don't even stick with it.
But now I will say this. Student teachers are down, but I will say this. There is a downside for Dr. Shepard and Dr. Hamilton. Let me make sure that they're in a very desirable location for young people to come and want to go to the beach or the mountains. The problem is affordability on a teacher's salary. That's the second half of it. That was what I experienced in Charlotte. When I was principal in Charlotte during the time when we had a lot of candidates and everybody wanted to come to Charlotte to keep the party going after college. The problem is they had to live 4 to a small 2-bedroom apartment to be able to afford it. Back then, teachers were making less than $30,000. I hired a young lady, and after the first pay, when her first paycheck came, she came and resigned, and she said, "I can't afford to work here." And she said, "I have a new car and an apartment on Park Road." I said, "I'm the principal of this high school, and I can't afford a new car and an apartment on Park Road." But her rent was more than her bring home pay. Let me say that again. Her rent on her apartment was more than her bring home pay. That's the downside where Dr. Shepard is in the Asheville area. Oh my Lord, the rents there. People have to live 30 and 40 miles out and commute out in rural areas. And the same way with Dr. Hamilton. Yes, it's a desirable location to live, but for young people, it's not an affordable one. They really can't, and they can't, and even if they can share apartments and those things, they can't really become full-fledged adults, get a home of their own, get married, those kinds of things, and afford to raise a family there. So for all those reasons, it's getting tougher and tougher and tougher to get good candidates. Make sure you know what the process is in your district. And to get candidates, and then you're going to have to work harder and harder than we ever have before with them to turn them into decent teachers. That's the nature of the beast. So the first part of tonight was to try to explain to you what you're going to be facing in hiring. It's not going to be easy. There's not going to be the numbers that there one time was. The quality's not going to be there. Keeping them is not going to be as easy because of the economics. It's going to be a struggle to retain and to find, retain, and induct, improve teacher candidates. And it is the single most important determinant of the academic outcomes in your building. You can't run away from the fact that teachers do the work of the organization. You won't teach a soul. Teachers do the work. And if you don't have quality teachers in the room, you will not be a successful school. You just won't make it organization. So you understand going in that you may have to rethink the notion of how you get candidates and then what you do with them. We're trying to train you what to do with them once you get them through the app sell and the app sell and the app tell. But the bigger question when we get here to the OMA and semester, in 603 is how do you get them? You can't fix some of the economic problems that you have. I can't make rent cheaper in Charlotte, Wilmington, or Asheville. It's not affordable for teachers. Teachers cannot afford to live there. And even veteran teachers can't afford to. All the folks that I knew when I was in the western part of the state that worked in Nashville all lived out in Leicester, about 25 miles away, and had to commute in. And that's not easy when it snows there 40 days a year. And so that became an issue, became a problem. They were without power. The roads were bad. And so many of them, after 2 or 3 years of that, won't live in the mountains. They just, we can't raise a family here. We can't live this way. Same thing happens at the beach. Can't live that way. One of my neighbors here, his daughter went to UNC Wilmington, and she was going to live in Wilmington, but she had to come home. Couldn't afford it. She had to come home. She just couldn't make it there. So we got some good comments going on the comment board tonight, but we want you to understand what you're facing here. And so I've got a pretty good PowerPoint here about hiring decisions. It's all about people and relationship, but it covers all the relevant laws, and it reminds you that the Board of Education employs teachers. You recommend to the HR recommends to the superintendent recommends to the board. You don't hire anybody, and neither does the superintendent or HR. The board makes the hiring and firing decision. And so I have all the relevant laws here for you, 115C, and all the appropriate things that you should know about hiring are here. All the scenarios, all the statutes are here. Everything that is your legal responsibility to do. And so this is a good one. It has duties and responsibilities of teachers. It speaks to dismissal, what their role is, and what grounds for dismissal are. This is kind of the personnel primer here is in this PowerPoint. It has all the adequate or all the appropriate laws in it, and I put those together for you, so you won't have to search the 545 general statutes to find them all. They're all right here. I put them together for you. So this is a good tool. This is one of those tools to put in your toolbox. This is a good one to have. All right. 2013, EVOS became part of the teacher evaluation, the school evaluation program, starting in 2013. We now determine teacher effectiveness by EVOS scores. We have now split the principal's evaluation from that, and we determine effectiveness by EVOS. Everybody understands that EVOS is value added. It's about children making a year's growth. And so teachers, 85% of their students have to make growth, and schools, 85% of the teachers their building have to make growth. And that's what comes out on your report card. And so this is the documentation that speaks to this and all of the policy behind EVOS and how it worked. Yes, it's from 2012-13, but that's when all this was enacted, when it became permanent. So you can go back and read through this if you're interested in law and policy. I have this one for you. What I want to spend some time now on, and here, of course, is the principal and assistant principal, how you're evaluated. If you go in and look, it's on evidence artifacts. That's why we have you do those. An artifact is a product resulting from your work. They're natural byproducts of work and not created for the purpose of satisfying evaluation requirements. That's why we don't want you to write narratives about how you're competent. That's not what an artifact is. That would be an evidence. An evidence is a written document that demonstrate or confirm the work of the person being evaluated and support the rating. It is developed for the evaluation purposes. So your evidence narrative, like in the app cell, it is for evaluation purposes. We're teaching you how to write an evidence that you will be asked to write to support the ratings that you get once you're in the job. The artifact is the things that you produce, and it has examples of them in the manual, so you need to look over that to make sure. I'm just throwing that one in transition here to where I want to get. I also have the teacher evaluation manual in there. You need to look through it about what your responsibilities are as an administrator. Make sure you read those and you understand that you've got to do your formal observations, your walkthroughs. So make sure you know what you're looking for when you're in the classroom. So make sure you look through that. But now what I want to spend some time on is this document. Now, I'm going to start with a disclaimer. EVOS is owned by a private company, SAS, out of the Research Triangle. Their work is proprietary. They do not release the calculus of their calculation of what it takes for a year's growth for a child. That does not happen. So, from my years of experience as a data person and from talking with folks in the know, what I have determined is of course, they're using a linear regression, which is a prediction equation, to develop an algorithm to develop the score that represents a year's growth for an individual child. So how that happened is they took 20 years at the time that this started, which was about 10 years ago. They took 20 years worth of standardized test scores from North Carolina and they dumped them into a database and they ran an analysis of variance. And what that tells you is what percentage of the variance in a kid's test score is due to dependent variables. The independent variable, of course, in the equation is the test score. That's what we're trying to predict. What would that test score be if this child made a year's growth? That's what EVOS is. If you break it down to its lowest common denominator here, what we're doing is this child must score this on this standardized test to show that he made a year's growth in this teacher's classroom. And so from the analysis of variance, they came up with the percentage of variance that each of the independent variables contribute to that test score. And so they found out what actually contributes to a kid's test score along the nine most important things other than the 10th, which is the teacher. And so when you add all those together, you get 100% of that test score. And so it works out like this. These are the 10 that I believe, and these are the percentages that data told us. And this is from all the research that I've done and reading and working for about 40 years in the business. So here are the 10 dependent variables and how much they count. Now, we didn't just pull these out of the air. This is not discriminatory or any of that. This is what the data tells us. That race accounts for 30% of the variance in a kid's test score. Mother's education, 15%. Father's income, 15%. Teacher, 10%. School district, 5. School, 5. Grade, 5. Age, 5. Gender, 5. Previous test scores, 5. That's the way it breaks down. That's what analysis of variance tells us. And so these are all the dependent variables that contribute to the independent variable, which is that child's test score, or a score that would show that child made a year's growth. The one thing that we can control in this is the 10% for the teacher. A good teacher gets 10%. If we control for all the others, then we can isolate whether that teacher added value or not. That's what EVOS is about, is determining if a teacher adds value in that classroom. Again, that's you don't teach a soul as a principal or assistant principal. The teachers do the work. You got to find good ones. You've got to induct them. You've got to develop them, and then and you can tell how good a job you've done or they've done by their EVOS scores. That's the report card. That everything else is controlled for. If the teacher adds that 10% from being great, then that child will make their growth. If the teacher does not add that 10%, it's not going to go well. So here's how this works in real life scenario. And here's my MTSS. This is my plan for developing teachers, by the way, if you would like to take some time to read that. This is my work. I developed this when we do some work in high-risk schools. This is the plan that I developed for working with them. It is a legal plan, and it goes along with the APSEL. It is basically the growth plan from the APTEL, and it is what you use if you're looking at EVOS scores. So it is a legal plan. All right, so this is how it would work in real life. This is how EVOS works. Third grade math, EOG, we'll use that as for example. So it has 180 questions on the test. So the total raw score that any kid could achieve would be 180 if they got them all right. The question is, what score out of 180 would represent a year's growth? And it's not the same for everybody. It's individual to every child. The total percentage of dependent variables times the total raw score yields a target raw score that shows a year's growth. So here's how it works. This is an actual real child, by the way. Jamar's a third grade student in Charlotte Mecklenburg. His dependent variables are, he's black, so he gets 20 out of 30 points. If he's white, he'd get 30 out of 30. And if he were Hispanic, he'd get 15 out of 30. That's not discriminatory. That's what those categories score in relationship to one another. So 30% of the variance in a child's score is due to his race. And so we're working off of that 30. So black kids score about 2/3 of what white kids score. Hispanic kids score about half in terms of their scores. That's what the scores tell us. That's not social commentary. That's just what the data says to us. We know there's a gap between the races. We can't ignore that. And so every school in North and South Carolina, every public school is required to have a closing the gap program. That's what the APSEL is a closing the gap program. And the reason why we have to close the gap is there's a differentiation between these subgroups. All right, Jamar's mother had less than a high school diploma, and so she got 5 out of 15 points for that one. If she had had no education, which that happens with some of the immigrants that come to our country, she'd have gotten, there would have been 0. Beyond a 4-year degree would have been 15. There was no father in the home, so that's 0 out of 15. Father's income in excess of $150,000 would have been 15. We always calculate the teacher at 10. Now, I'll pause there. I see a couple questions. Let me go back and see those. It says it's not true anymore. Hispanic students are now outscoring. In certain situations, that is true. But when we look at all of them, when we factor in the English, this factors in the language barrier that kids have. When we talk about Hispanic kids, we're talking about non-English speaking kids. We don't pull them out separate. We count Hispanic as white if they're native speakers. That's why I said let me go back and make some clarifications now before I start throwing stuff at me. That's why you're now asked to, even though you might put down that you're white, you ask if you're Hispanic or Hispanic heritage. If you are a native speaker of English, even though you might be of Hispanic heritage, you're counted as white. The Hispanic in this situation are Hispanic kids who are not native speakers, and they are lower than anybody else, obviously because of language barrier. Why is mother's education and father's income that way? You know, we all know who does lap time with children. What's the best determinant of the kid's readiness to read is how much lap time they spent in their mother's lap with their mom reading to them prior to coming to school. Father's income, if it's high enough, means mom can stay at home and work with the child in the formative years. So that's why those are as they are. The teacher, we count them as 10. That means that every child is supposed to have a highly qualified teacher. If they're in a high wealth district, they get 5 out of 5. If they're in low wealth, they get 2 out of 5. The school itself, a high growth school is 5, a takeover school is 0, a low growth school is 2. This child was at Billingsville, and so he got a 0. He was grade appropriate. He was not a repeater, so he got the 5 out of 5 points. Kim made a point nobody knows. It would be helpful. That's why I'm teaching you, so you can tell them. The whole idea is you need to know, you need to work with your staff on understanding EBOS, so that they know that there's not certain groups that do, teachers have this notion, well, if I had that group, I'd do better. No, they all have an equal opportunity to do well. But now certain teachers get better results for certain groups, and that's your job comes in. We'll talk about that later. His age, he's 9 years old, but he was developmentally delayed. He started school at the age of 6. So that's 3 out of 5 points because he didn't start school on time. Gender, he gets 5 points because it's a math test. If it were a reading test, he'd get 4 points. Just the opposite for females. That's the difference in the genders. Females score better on reading tests than boys. Boys score better on math tests. So the 4 or 5 there, the 4 or 5 is based on what kind of test it is. Previous test scores, he got 2 out of 5 because he was not on grade level due to M-class data coming out of 2nd grade. So here's Jamar's equation. He got 20 points for black. He got 5 points for mother's education, no points for father's income, 10 points for teacher, 5 points for a high wealth school district, 0 points for a takeover school. He got 5 points for being in the proper grade. He got 3 points because he was developmentally delayed. He got 5 points because he was a male, and he got 2 points on his previous score. And so you add all that together is 55%. Possible raw score total on that test is 180. We multiply that by 0.55, and so 55% of 180 is 99. So he has to. So when his projected score comes out, he has to score 99. He has to get 99 out of 180 right for him to have shown a year's growth. That's the way EBOS works. Now, there's no manual you can go to read this. They don't release this because it's proprietary, but this is how a analysis of variance to a linear regression to an algorithm works. I teach this in doctoral studies, and this is fairly common. This is how this works. We do regression. This is how we collect data on your purchasing habits. This is how we market to you through the internet. Is we collect data. We come up with algorithms just like this, and that's how the world works now. If you want to read more about that, there's a book called Super Crunchers by Ian Ayres that talks about linear regressions. The largest linear regression in outside of the field of statistics, the largest linear regression is eHarmony. eHarmony is a linear regression. You take everything you know about somebody, you dump it into analysis of variance, you create a linear regression that shows who your potential matches would be. eHarmony is the biggest linear regression outside of data of statistics in the world. That's what it is. And so that's how they figure out who's compatible, is they do a linear regression out of analysis of variance. So that's one of the stories that the book Super Crunchers tells. So that's how that score is determined. Now, here's the trick for you as administrators. Certain teachers tend to do better with certain levels of kids. but teachers don't always want to teach those levels of kids. This algorithm shows that every child, you have the same probability of getting a year's growth out of every child. But what the algorithm doesn't show is some teachers do a better job with certain levels of kids than others. The problem with that scenario is then you have to group those kids, and we go back to the old system like when I came through school with the bluebirds, the robins, and the buzzards. Ability grouping. You don't want to go back to that, but certain teachers do better job. So you do flexible grouping for reading and math now. That's one of the keys to be able to do that. Also, to be able to do a mosaic master schedule where you can do flexible scheduling and you can group kids, because certain teachers do better with certain levels of kids. MTSS works with kids doing response to intervention, reteaching those lessons. There are several things that you can do, but you can't outrun your kid. This child, Jamar, he's never going to score 150 out of 180. We want him to. But if we can get him to 99 in a year's growth, we've done well with him. But the thing to remind teachers is every child has the same probability of making growth. High kids, their scores, there could be a kid that has to score 175 out of 180 to show year's growth. But it's the personality, the dispositional traits of certain teachers work better with certain kids. And so that speaks to how you schedule your school, which is, a big part of what we're doing here this summer is learning how to schedule a school. You need to look at your EVOS data. You need to look, and the principals in the room with us tonight can tell you, your kids are in certain groups or categories, and you can tell who does best with kids who've got to score 150 as opposed to 100 out of 180. You have to make those decisions, and you have to factor that in to your staff development model. How much and what kind of staff development you're going to do with your teachers. You have to look at your outcome data. So your master schedule has to take EVOS into account, and how and who teaches what, where, and when. Part of that has to be that's that teacher input part at the end. Remember, we start with federal law, then we go to state law, and then local board policy, and then best practices. Best practices is EVOS, putting kids with teachers that get the best results. And then teacher input comes last, and they can kind of argue or maybe move some kids. But EVOS is the best practice part of master scheduling, which is number 4 on the list. It comes before teacher input. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have teachers' input into the process, but you've got to make sure that after federal law, state law, local board policy, that EVOS comes next in determining, when you put those stickies in that big grid of what classes are taught, where and when by who, that EVOS has a seat at the table. That's number 4. And that's why I wanted to make sure I covered this tonight. So as we move through this course this summer, we're going to hit federal law. We talked about state law. We talked about board policy and scheduling. This is the 4th of the estates, the 5 estates. This has to have a seat at the table. This has to factor into your staff development plan. I call mine MTSS for teachers. This has to factor into what you do as a professional. Let me stop again. And I'm going to call on the professionals in the field. Let me go here. All right. How do you advise a schedule is devised if school does not utilize EVOS? Told me they don't use it like schools in North Carolina do. I would use it as much as I could, because it gets great results if you pair the teachers with kids who get the best results. And you want to do the best you can for students. You also want to do the best you can for your school. One of the things you learn, especially from some of the the books like Super Crunchers or Keeping Up with the Quants by Davenport, is that everybody thinks that they can outpredict the numbers, but the numbers always win. The numbers always beat the experts, always. The numbers always beat the experts. A lot of people, I know what kids should go. I know what teachers ought to be teaching. The data, regression, analysis of variance and regression theory always beats the experts. It just does. If you're in a district if you have access to EVOS for your own safety, my school doesn't use this at all to make the money. It's about equity and making sure each teacher, yeah. But see, giving everybody the same and rewarding everybody is not, that may not be the best, but be the best way to get the best results in your school. And in the end, that's what they pay you for, not to make teachers happy. We don't want you to make them unhappy, but you're there for student achievement, and that's what you have to absolutely focus on, that achievement. It's not about time or turn. I hired a young lady after the first semester. I put her in AP, and she said, "I've only been here a semester. It's not my turn." I said, "It's not about turn. It's about talent. You get better results." And the knucklehead coach that I've got, that I inherited teaching European AP history, he's never had a student to pass the AP exam. Let me say that again. He's been teaching European AP history for 4 years. He's never had a 2 semester. He's never had a student pass the exam. You can't do worse than him. He's batting 0. You cannot be worse than he is. So, it's about putting your people where they're the most effective. It's about doing the best you can for students. Your job is to look out for them. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shepard. I'm going to call on him. He's at a high school level. I want him to address EVOS from the high school level, and then we'll close out with Dr. Crawford and Dr. Hamilton talking about EVOS from the elementary level. Dr. Shepard?
Yes, sir. So it's really important that in North Carolina especially, and I can't speak to South Carolina that much, but in North Carolina especially, you better have a great understanding of EVOS and be able to articulate that to your staff, especially new staff as they come in. A mistake you don't want to make is that you explained it to your staff, 3 or 4 years ago, and you haven't explained it to those incoming members. So you need to do that every year so they have an understanding of the impact they do make and do understand that it doesn't make an impact on their staff, on their students. Not to mention your entire paycheck, for that matter, is based on EVOS as a principal in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to change anytime soon. So you need to know that. For us at the high school level, and I'm getting some feedback. I apologize if you guys are. At the high school level, you got 3 EOCs. So you have English 2, biology, and you have math 1. And that is the largest portion of where your growth model comes from at the high school level. So you may only have really, 10, 12 teachers in those classes that teach those courses. And that's a huge impact of where your growth score comes from. Other teachers receive an EVOS a growth rating, but as far as that school report card goes, it is those 3 EOC courses, just English 2, just biology, and math 1. Your school as a whole receives an EVOS grade, and you have all kinds of data that's reported on each teacher, and you see different quintiles because Dr. Lamb spoke to that. Some teachers perform really high with lower level students, certain quintiles, and so the way we do it at our school is to make sure that our PLCs are very strong, because we want to replicate those teachers who do really well with certain quintiles of students. So, that middle level 2, 3 student in that quintile there, some teachers do really well. Some teachers don't do so well with the high performing students. And so working really strong with PLCs, you're able to replicate what some teachers do really well. And that's the beauty of the PLC model, is that you're not leaving anyone out. And teachers work together consistently. They look at data consistently. When they start creating those common assessments, start analyzing that data, that carries over through your benchmarks throughout the rest of the year. And so you're not waiting around until October to say, okay, we got our EVOS scores back, now we could look at it. You have an idea what's taking place throughout the year. And that's a big key to EVOS as well. You know, those EOC teachers get to see predictor data, which says that the state predicts these students to score this. So you know what that predictor data is for those students going into the year. But the other teachers don't see that predictor data if they're not teaching an EOC course, which is another big part of it. You have to actually go through and chart a lot of that data, work with your instructional coach to look at that data and diagram that for yourselves. You don't get a lot of that predictor data score. And so you have to have a good understanding as an administrator to be able to look back at that data from their last test to see if you can use these models to help predict where those students are going to be, but you want to focus some of your instruction on some of those kids. It's really in depth. You can teach an entire course on EVOS and really how to use it in your school. But as an administrator, what I could tell you is that you need to educate yourself as much as you possibly can on it. One of the things I did is I signed up for a workshop at SAS, and I went and spent 3 days there. And so I got to educate myself and sit and listen to these gentlemen and ladies about what it meant and how they created it and why they created it, so that I could be able to articulate that to my staff. And that's really helped me. I need a refresher because they seem to start dialing in on some things, and they start adding things to different models when you go into EVOS. And even the other day I was looking at some things and I'm going, I've not seen this before. And so I have to go back and read up on it. And so it's something you want to stay on top of for sure.
Yeah. Dr. Crawford, you mentioned that new for this year, they're going to start separate report cards for each grade, for each subgroup.
Yeah, for each subgroup. So, you know, you can't even look at it. I mean, you're really going to have to get into the weeds with all of your kids when you're looking at data and looking at teacher performance with those students. So it becomes even more critical now to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are, or as I like to call them, plus deltas in your building. And EVOS can tell you that.
Yeah.
You know, I've got a reflection sheet that I had teachers do this year. And then for those teachers that have been teaching long enough to generate EVOS data, so you got to remember they have to have 3 years of data points to get that first rating. Their PDP is based on what that EVOS data says, because I've got very good teachers. But when you drill down into their performance on EVOS, you'll see that, especially with the way my school is made up, it's not uncommon for me to have a teacher who is, you know, +2, +3 with students on the low end of the scale. But then when you look at students in the middle and high, and one teacher in particular, she was, you know, -1, -1.5. And she admitted she was, you know, very honest. She said, I'm honestly just not comfortable working with kids who already come to my class knowing how to read. And that's counterintuitive. I know. But again, when you understand the makeup of my building, she's comfortable with really digging in and helping kids to read that don't have those skills. And when you look at her EVOS data, it reflects that. And so her PDP for the coming year, and then her PD for the year is going to be around making sure we develop those strategies so that she can become more even and make sure she's as comfortable with the students that she's more comfortable with that are her struggling kids, and making sure she's providing that same level of rigor for her green and blue kids. So that's also where you can use EVOS to really dig in and understand where your individual teacher strengths are. And Dale, when I get in tomorrow, I'll forward you the form that I give to all my teachers. It forces them to go through and breaks down, and maybe you can add that to this particular section.
That's great. That would be wonderful to have in this. Dr. Hamilton, I'll let you close this out tonight. What I hope, folks, is you're getting a sense of is personnel is more than just hiring. Hiring is important, but then you've got to get the right people. EVOS should influence some of your hiring decisions, the types of people you're looking for. But you've got to work with them once you get them. It's more important to work with them. They're not going to come in droves. You're not going to get the best candidates, but you've got to get the best results. And that's where the professional part of being a principal comes in, working your professional growth plan, working the individual teacher growth plans, working your plan. Mine's called MTSS for teachers, working RTI, response to intervention, all those things that you have to do, making sure your master schedule, making sure your budget, all this fits together under the big umbrella of personnel decisions. And so Dr. Hamilton, close us out tonight.
Okay. My colleagues have given lots of great and very, very true information. Unfortunately, EVOS doesn't come until half the school year is over the following year. So that makes it so difficult to be able to use that very important data for making those decisions that have to be made before school really begins. Dr. Crawford, I'm going to ask this because I'm not Title I, but I know about the subgroup scores. It now impacts all of us, Title I or not, will all be held to the same sanction. So if you become a targeted assistance school because you have a subgroup that didn't make a certain grade, isn't it true that to get out of that status that they have to first of all make the grade and that group has to exceed growth? Am I correct?
They have to make growth 2 years in a row, and for many schools, that's the subgroup that's going to get us all in trouble. Is our exceptional children's population. That, of course, that's the most difficult group of kids to move. So that's where even many high-performing schools will fall into that category because they may not be making the growth with their exceptional children's category.
Right, and that's exactly what's happening here as well. It's the exceptional children's category. I've never been so proud of C in my life when I got a C in that area. Didn't even know I needed to get a C, but I was proud of that C. Woo! The other thing I wanted to say was back to what everyone else has said as well. I had a new AIG teacher last year. Then when our EVOS came out, we saw that the children basically just met growth. They certainly didn't exceed. So we made a lot of rigorous decisions based on that information that we needed to do something to move those children. But what I wanted to point out that I don't think I've heard is, so in elementary school, your EVOS everybody gets an EVOS score, but your school's EVOS is based on your 3rd grade reading, 4th grade reading and math, and 5th grade reading, math, and science. So if you divide that out, that means that 3rd grade counts towards 1/6 of your EVOS, 4th grade, 1/3, and 5th grade, 1/2. So think about that when you're thinking about you have allocations of 1 to 24 or 1 to 25 or whatever in grades 4 and 5. So what can you do? You might have to make your 4th grades a little heavier to try to let your 5th grades have a reprieve and maybe have 23 or 24, maybe, and sacrifice 4th grade because we don't have a class size limit there.
And you're capped at 3rd grade, supposedly.
Yes, capped at 3rd. So you can't really mess with that. But think about that. So if you had to decide who's going to have the biggest classrooms, then choose 4th grade because your 5th grade is going to count for half of your school report card grade and your EVOS growth. That's significant. So when you're thinking about how much time you're spending in classrooms, giving feedback, really monitoring instruction, making sure that you're there, that you are paying attention to those children and making sure they're staying on task, that's huge, especially when many of us have 29 and 30 sitting in 5th grade classrooms. So that's just all I was going to add. Everybody else did such a great job, but that's what I wanted to add. Just something to consider.
And that's all part of master scheduling, having to make those decisions, having to make the tough decisions. Teachers won't always like the decisions you make, but you have to make the decisions best for the organization and for kids. They have to be kind of at the end of that process. To kind of close us out tonight, thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Thank you for everybody tonight. The percentages were 1/6 for 3rd, 1/3 for 4th, and 1/2 for 5th. That's how much EVOS counts. But to kind of close us out tonight, the famous theorist Frederick Hertzberg, talked about motivation, and it's big when you're working with personnel. He called them motivators and hygienes. We now refer to them as satisfiers and dissatisfiers. People stay because of satisfiers in their job. They go because of dissatisfiers. One of the things you have to understand as a principal, you cannot be a satisfier. Satisfaction comes from the job itself, but you can be a dissatisfier. So some of these decisions that you make, if you explain them to people and that you work with people, and if they have a group that they want to work with but they're not good at it, that they're willing to do the staff development that it takes, again, you can't be everybody's motivator. You can't be the hero, but you can be the GOAT. And so if you work hard enough, according to Hertzberg, the best you can do is not be a dissatisfier. But it's up to you, and children and your school need for you to be a professional and use data the proper way. And if you do that, the teachers that work with you will understand that, and they'll still be motivated to work hard. But I think the point is Dr. Shepard made is you really got to dig into this and know your business. You got to be able to explain it to them as well. And close out with Dr. Hamilton. You better know where your points are, where your scores are, and you better schedule accordingly. All right, that's all I have tonight, Dr. Stedman. It's time for the benediction. You get the final word.
Okay, I think they've heard a lot. So I think they realize. And again, all of this, I'm glad everybody has said what they've said, because you have clearly defined how all of this ties directly in to what you're having to do right now with Task 2 of the OMA. It all tied directly into that.
Exactly. This is what hopefully, if you didn't understand it last semester, you now understand what we did in the APTEL and why we did it. Now that we're putting it all together into a schedule and a budget and all those things, hopefully the light bulb came on tonight or will come on. Oh, that's why they had me do all those things in the APTEL.
And Dr. Lamb, Dr. Hamilton spoke. I appreciate her saying that, because that is why the emphasis was placed in Task 2 to look at the Exceptional Children's Program, the special needs. And Dr. Hamilton, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. You're welcome. That's where your scores are. All right, we've run a little over time, but we got started a little bit late, but it was very good. Professors, thank you all for your participation tonight. We'll talk more about case studies next week as we get into them the week after. We'll talk more about those. Professors, if y'all need me, I'm available. I'll get the video out to you, and you can post it a little bit later on, Dr. Stedman, when we get this done. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you've had a good week. We'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.